Hi, and welcome to another edition of Sudden Impact Family Style with Bill Sutton.
And Jason Sutton.
And we've got a number of topics to talk to you about today. I think we're going to start by talking about the NBA All-Star format since I was there last week and I made some observations.
I watched it on television.
First, the positives. I really enjoyed the skills competition. I really liked the bigs and the point guards battling it out. I was very impressed with Porzingis, and I thought the format really lends itself. It was really easy to get into. I pretty much thought the 3-point shootout was the same. Nothing negative, nothing out of the ordinary. And then the slam dunk contest started off amazingly interesting, and then deteriorated faster than anything I can ever remember. I mean, it just went downhill really quickly. I think, for the most part, I would say that fans watching it in the building lost interest. And I can't speak to people watching on TV. Jason, what did it seem like to you?
I was screening it, and I looked away constantly. I know I checked Twitter. Twitter was not impressed, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
It made me start to think, though, as we look at the NBA Slam Dunk Contest, like, is there anything anybody can do to really impress anybody at this point? I mean, the human body, I feel like we've seen incredibly athletic achievements. We see it every single year, but at a certain point, like, how many different things can you jump over before I've seen you jump over everything? How many times can you spin? What can drop the basketball? I mean...
Yeah, we had the drone this year, and that looked very
promising.
Interesting for about 10 seconds, and then all of a sudden
the drone just dropped the basketball.
The drone just dropped the basketball. It's not that there was anything special about it. It could have been just dropped. Somebody could have dropped it from the rafters, but
which would have been more impressive, most likely, I think.
Yeah, possibly. It just wasn't good. And then the game itself was probably the least entertaining All-Star game I've ever seen. It was like a demonstration of cherry picking. Athlete just gets a rebound, turns, throws the length of the court, baseball pass, somebody dunks it. I think it was a travesty that Wilt Chamberlain's All-Star dunk record or scoring record was broken in that game because there really wasn't any style or athleticism or anything, any competition really to make it worth breaking a record. I was very, very disappointed in that.
I turned it off. It was just unwatchable.
It wasn't unwatchable. I don't know what to do. It's one of those things where you're playing in season, so there's a risk of injury, but they actually play it more like the NFL Pro Bowl, where there's really no risk of injury.
Right.
I mean, if you look at it, the baseball and the hockey All-Star games, which are in mid-season, are both much, much more watchable, much, much more entertaining, and much, much more exciting. And, Jason and I were talking about the possibility maybe, do you let the NBA play for home court advantage like you do in baseball for that seventh game in the finals? And, I don't know if that's the answer or not. What do you think, Jason?
Well, I don't know if you could up the money a little bit. I mean, when they first started the All-Star game, like the bonus you got in the 1970s for winning the All-Star game was significant. Now it's pocket change to these guys. And again, I don't want to take credit for this because I heard it somewhere else and I can't remember where. Otherwise, I would love to give them credit. But they talked about doing it like a skins competition, so that each quarter there was something up for grab that would go to each team's charity. So that you hopefully get, where the fourth quarter where they start to play a little bit of defense, that hopefully you would at least create 4 more situations for that to take place, or I guess 3 more because it would be the first 3 quarters. But again, I don't know what the incentive is for the players. They don't want to get hurt. They're all competing for a championship and new contracts. And none of them seem to have any desire to really compete that hard.
No, it's a dilemma. I'm sure they probably get some people studying because I'm sure they've gotten a lot of feedback that it really wasn't what it needs to be, and it kind of scared some people. But then again, I saw the ratings, and the ratings were up, so that surprised me.
And I was about to say, I was like I said, I was following on Twitter, and they were complaining, but they were watching to complain. So it wasn't like the numbers were down, which again is the bottom line, and that's pretty much what it takes.
Yeah.
I was looking at the trade deadline, where we had very little movement. It looks like some of the bigger moves are going to be, Jose Calderon and Bogut, to see where they end up. But it seems like the top 2 teams are so set in stone. No offense to the San Antonio Spurs, who have the second best record in basketball, and are the Spurs, and you have to give them, just infinite. As long as Popovich is still there and that team is still there, you have to at least give them a fighter's chance. But with the Warriors being the Warriors and the Cavs being the Cavs, why would anybody trade for anybody? Is there a single player out there that could make your team a contender with the Warriors or the Cavs right now? Like, if you're the Celtics, you're competing, your numbers are great, you're bringing in fans all the time, and you're looking at a loaded draft where you probably have a 40% chance to get one of the first 2 picks in the draft with 2 guys in Foles and Ball that are considered to be locks for great players. You're competing now. You're setting yourself up for the future. Mm-hmm. You cash in all those assets for Butler or Paul George, even if he actually is available, depending on what you believe and what you read. Or are you still even on the Warriors level or a healthy Cavs team's level?
Now, I think if the Cavs are adding Darren Williams,
mm-hmm.
and if the Cavs,
the Warriors look like they're going to get Calderon,
and the Cavs might get Bogut too.
And Bogut is looking at Oklahoma City, Boston, Cleveland, and Golden State right now.
Interesting. So it could be, but really you have 2
juggernauts.
I'm going to put the Spurs in there just because they play so well together, they mesh so well together, and they don't have any real ups and downs. But you really have 3 teams, and everybody else is playing for whatever else.
Right.
And unless there's a major injury, you can't help but pencil in the Cavs and the Warriors.
And even when you look at that Warriors team, like if they lost one of their big 4, I don't really know, but that still doesn't make them the overwhelming favorite at the same time.
No. But you know what? You've got the interesting thing about that team is Draymond Green, who can help you and kill you at the same time. And, if he maintains his discipline and can play within the system, if he doesn't have to do something crazy, but then it's why Bogut or somebody would be a good backup to maybe make that better. So we'll see what happens.
And on the Cleveland side of things, I thought Bogut would be a great guy to go in there and poke at the bear that is Draymond Green for 7 games and see if you can get him to bite.
Yeah.
I mean, because again, he's shown in the past that he doesn't have that discipline, and maybe he's learned from his last mistake that you can argue that he cost them a championship last year. I mean, nothing taking away from the Cavs 3-1 comeback, but when he went out, they had all the momentum in the world. By the time he came back, it had swung in the middle of one game, but you have to wonder, can he stay on track? Can he be that guy who maintains the entire time? Will he learn from his mistake from last year?
Yeah, we'll have to see. But while we're talking basketball, let's switch to college. Let's talk March Madness. And we had Gonzaga go down on their home court yesterday
to BYU after being 25-point favorites on ESPN.com.
I know, really surprising. And a couple other teams go down yesterday. UCLA win at Arizona, which was another thing. It's shaping up a little bit more interesting than I had originally thought. It's definitely, to me, very, very wide open. I don't see a favorite. I see you're probably your 4 seed. You could argue every number 1 seed, and you could argue every number 2 seed, 3 seed, 4 seed. So it looks like it's going to be really competitive, really interesting. Again, the beauty of it is it really has a David Goliath element. So even though you can argue about the Power 5 in football, but you really can't argue the Power 5 as much in basketball because other things do happen.
Right.
And what I like about it is, when people say, well, the NCAA will go away and we won't have an NCAA someday, we'll just have this big Power 5 thing. And I say, no, you won't. Because the Power 5 without the mid-majors and the possibility of David beating Goliath, CBS won't pay for that the way they pay for March Madness. So, I mean, what drives March Madness is that on any given day, any team can win. A 15 can beat a 2. So that's really what drives it. So I think that'll always be there. But it's going to be an exciting time.
And those are the majority of my memories from the tournament. I mean, it's that, Gordon Hayward shot at the buzzer to possibly beat Duke. It's, Florida Atlantic's run when they were was it Florida Atlantic? Or no? Florida Gulf Coast. It's Davidson. It's all these little, Western Michigan. It's all these little teams that get in, and you find this little underdog to sort of just grab on and root for. I was really disappointed to see Gonzaga lose because I wanted to see what the committee would do if they were the only undefeated team by far. If they had just won their tournament, and they were the only undefeated team, if they would have given them the overall number 1, or if they would still have pushed them back.
See, I think it probably would have given them the overall number 1 because I think Gonzaga doesn't qualify as that mid-major. They seem to be an independent team playing in a mid-major schedule, but they play enough national games with other teams that are major schools and from major conferences. So I think that would still be there. But let's see, they still got to play the tourney, and the tourney's on neutral court. So we'll see what they do in the postseason. And maybe, and two, I've heard people always argue that it's good to have that loss going in before the tournament. It helps you refocus and see what you're capable of doing. So we'll have to see where it goes. But it's going to be exciting. And then we've got UConn playing tomorrow night here in Tampa for their last regular season game of the year before the tournament. And I don't see them losing in 2017 any way at all. I just don't see it.
They haven't lost in how many years now?
Over two,
which is just insane. No matter what you say about, the state of women's basketball or competition, like two consecutive, like we talked about, like Gonzaga lost to a team they were a 25-point favorite over, and that was just trying to win 20-something games in a row. Yeah. They're sitting over 100 right now, 2 consecutive seasons, or almost 3 consecutive seasons.
Mm-hmm. And then,
untouched.
I watched the highlights of Kelsey Plum last night for Washington, the leading scorer in women's basketball history, and second only to Pistol Pete Maravich for the all-time scoring leader, which always reminds me of the fact that if they had the three-point play when Pistol Pete was in college, he'd have scored 5,000 points because most of his shots were back that far. But she's kind of a story. I would love to see her get on national television a little bit and let us see what she's got and maybe make the women's tournament more interesting. I don't know.
Because that one does tend to go chalk every single year. There's very few upsets on the women's side.
Very few upsets. And, with the home court kind of advantages to hosting it, so you have the attendance and everything, it just kind of adds to it.
And on those same lines, I was thinking about this with Gonzaga again, because I know, as you said, they're not exactly a typical mid-major.
No.
But people give them a lot of heat for, going out in the second round of a tournament or getting to the Sweet 16. But they technically are a mid-major school at the end of the day, like based on their attendance and their,
sure,
everything else. And what is their obviously every team would love to win an NCAA championship, but isn't making the tournament for some mid-majors just the ultimate goal?
Oh, absolutely. For some,
and then
for
the Sweet
some
16 would just be
massive. But I think Gonzaga, anything short of the Final Four this year would be a disappointment.
I think so. I think they finally reached. I think they reached that point a few years ago as well. But
yeah.
They seem to be one of those teams that just can't seem to. I don't know. They just had bad luck come tournament time, bad matchups.
Yeah,
and they haven't been able to pull that Cinderella magic that sort of put them on the map. I guess close to like 10, 15 years ago, right? They've been
they've been in every conversation every year,
every single year.
Yeah.
I guess now we can turn to a different sort of NBA conversation, and that is the announcer-player beef we have going. You have Charles Barkley, you have Shaq and JaVale McGee, who've just been getting heated. Kevin Durant's getting in on the mix.
And it gets back to what we talked about, Jason, when we decided we want to start this podcast. We said, great conversation, no yelling.
No yelling.
And it just seems like people want now to be, they either want to yell or they want to stoke somebody's fire and get them to yell and be upset. And it doesn't seem like we're really talking about the stories that are important. We're kind of creating stories through creating conflict. And, it's just very unfortunate. I think it's very demeaning for a Hall of Famer like Shaq and a Hall of Famer like Charles Barkley to be demeaning today's current stars. I think it's unfortunate. They're no longer playing. They really can't. They don't have a real sense, but they're trying to create stories where there really aren't any stories just by creating this controversy.
And as you said, there are other stories. There are things to report about. There's, people having an amazing season. You've got guys like Porzingis, Anthony Towns, the Greek freak, who I always pronounce his name incorrectly. I won't even attempt to. But, you do have stories out there. Mm-hmm. And if then, it always goes back to, but again, it looks like this is what gets ratings, like this drama or fake drama. Like now you have this Twitter beef and this Twitter war. And again, like you said, you figure guys like Shaq and Charles Barkley, who probably went through some of the similar things with some older players in their generation. Now, that was prior to social media, but, you guys have it easier today. Back in my day, it was a much more physical game. Back in my day, it was much more difficult.
It wasn't as mean-spirited. It was just comparative. You couldn't have done that in our day, but this is a little mean-spirited, I think.
Yeah, the Shaq JaVale McGee thing especially. It seems like he points him out anytime JaVale McGee does anything, any sort of basketball-related mistake, which everybody makes. Jordan dribbled off his foot. Shaq makes sure he puts JaVale McGee on his Shaq'd in a Fool segment.
Yeah.
And while that's a fun segment from time to time, if you're just showing, the blooper reel, the missed dunk, the airball free throw, but it seems like he's really focused in on certain people. and he's just sort of prodding and poking and hoping to get some sort of reaction, which obviously he has.
Mm-hmm.
And now Kevin Durant is coming in to defend his teammate.
Sure.
The coaches are coming in, and it's becoming, again, it seems like people are just eating up this Twitter war. Like, they can't wait to see who's going to say what back, what drama is going to come. And I mean, you look at reality TV and social media, and that does seem to be what pushes the needle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to imagine, like, if they went the high road and they reported on the actual basketball stories, would their numbers go down?
See, it's interesting because those guys are paired with Ernie Johnson, who would never stoop to that. And I mean, Ernie Johnson's, I think it's demeaning Ernie Johnson, what Ernie Johnson brings to the table. I mean,
Kenny Smith doesn't seem like he's really into that kind of stuff either.
No, I mean, you have to be above the fray, and you can't create the fray. So it's been really, really disappointing to me to see where it is. And and Jason, to be honest with you, I'm finding the same thing outside the NBA. I'm finding it on print. I'm finding it in websites, different television broadcasts. There's different commentary shows now. It just seems like, hey, we know there's a lot of battle for content out there. We're going to say something that's incendiary, get somebody to react to it, and then that'll help our ratings and put us in a position. And
Right.
I just don't think it's just not good.
And back to when we set up this podcast, the No Yelling podcast, like, you look at some of those, and I'm not going to call anybody out specifically, obviously, but it does seem like they feel like, they look at the sports media, the sports landscape, and like, what's the most ridiculous thing I can say that's going to cause people to just blow up Twitter and call me an idiot and start this giant war? They just throw it out there. Whether they believe, there's no intention other than to get this huge reaction. But again, it comes back to, they're in a position now where they're trying to get ratings, and their bosses are pushing them to get ratings. So at some point, it sort of goes on to the audience.
And where do you think it started? Do you think it started with Tony Kornheiser and Wilbon? They're not mean-spirited, but they do yell. And they do try and be outrageous and draw the other one in. And the same thing with Mike and Mike, with Greeny Golick. It gets stupid about different things. But again, it's not mean-spirited. And it seems like that was the starting point. That was successful. People wanted to copy that. And then they wanted to put their own stamp on it. And it seems like that's where it's gone. It's gotten mean now.
Right. And I feel like you get, because especially a show like the one on before Pardon the Interruption, Around the Horn. You do have some recurring ghosts, but yes, but you get these guys that get to come on, and this is their one chance. They're the local sports reporter from Denver, and this is their chance to be on TV, mm-hmm. and they want to be brought back, because obviously, if you're in print, you want to be on television,
sure,
and you want to build this media empire. So it's like when you get your one chance out there, you can't be the person that has a nice, low key, critical argument. You have to be the guy that's outrageous, the guy that says something that all of a sudden people are like, oh, that's a brand, like it's a brand, like you're trying to create this. And it seems like, unfortunately, that's the easiest brand to create. And you look throughout, all over television, reality television. Like, if you want to stay on one of those reality shows, they want you to be the most outrageous person.
Yeah, for sure.
A little bit about my background. I actually was cast on a reality show. And one of the first things I had to do in my interview, like I knew going in, I had to play a certain personality. Mm-hmm. I stripped down to my underwear in my interview session. Because they wanted, it was one of those, just random suggestions. I wanted to show them that, at the drop of a hat, I'll do something crazy. And not that that's the most crazy thing, but this was like 15 years ago, so it was a little bit crazier. But
But the mentality was around.
The mentality was around. Like, if I want to get on this show, if I want to separate myself, I have to be someone that's going to do something insane at the drop of a hat. Whether or not that's my actual personality, which it's not. And again, I don't know if it's, sort of chicken egg argument. Like, if you went and you presented, some wonderful things about people and you told these nice stories about certain players and the great things they do in the community, would people eat those stories up? Would they get inspired? Would they continue to read those? Or would they just sort of read the headline, brush past, and move on to the most inflammatory thing possible? And I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, and sometimes, people just take something and just stoke it. Like this morning I woke up, got the Sunday paper, and there's a column in the Tampa paper about the two USF players that missed their flight. And, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but if you're an adult and you're in the airport and you miss your flight, it's your fault.
Without a doubt.
There shouldn't have to be somebody to get you and put you on an airplane, even if you are a student athlete. It's just silly. And they were very critical of the basketball team for not having counted them and made sure they're on there. And I think, if we're really teaching these young men and young women to preparing them for life, you got to be able to get on an airplane by yourself. And yet the guy writes a whole story on the front page about how this is, talks to the player's mother and she's upset because he missed the flight. Be upset because he missed the flight, not because somebody didn't put him on the flight. But again, it just goes with the same thing we're talking about. It's just this whole non-story is there to try and put an edge on somebody and get a reaction.
And like I said, unfortunately, it seems to be the way that works. I mean, because I know I've seen people that are more interested in the Shaq, Javale McGee beef than were ever interested in Javale McGee before. And people that really, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, what is this about? And they're asking questions, and they're like, what's going on? And it's...
If anything, people have Googled him and found out who he is, and now they look for him. And, I mean, he's actually gotten some positivity out of it, even though it's negative publicity.
Right, because he's drawn Kevin Durant in and his coach in, who are both defending him and attacking Shaq.
Yeah.
Which gives Shaq more material to go back against KD and everybody else, and it just becomes this whole thing. Like the Charles Barkley one seemed like it was more of an old man yelling up the porch at first.
Yeah.
Where he was just mad that the Warriors were shooting 3-pointers all the time and didn't feel like that was real basketball. And now it's, devolved into something a little bit more personal where he's picking on individual players. Yeah. But initially it seemed like that came out of a philosophical thing about the sport of basketball, and a 3-point team can never win the NBA Finals, and then obviously they did. Or a team that predominantly shoots threes. Yeah. Although in his defense, they're a very unique team.
They're a very unique team.
It's not like it's 4 or 5 guards shooting threes.
No.
Like they have, a guy like Draymond Green, who's as we talked about earlier, he is a head case from time to time, but he's a very unique player.
Very unique player.
And even when they talk about now about going small with their lineup, Kevin Durant's a legitimate 7-foot player.
Sure.
I mean, he plays on the perimeter and he shoots from the outside, but he's not a small player.
No.
I mean, you're going small with a 7-footer, which, there's teams that go big that can't roll out a 7-footer.
It's going to be an interesting NBA Finals, and it's going to be a very interesting March Madness.
Mm-hmm. And I'm especially excited to see one more NBA story. Is obviously DeMarcus Cousins was the big name traded.
Yeah.
And they are 0-2.
They are 0-2. It takes time to adjust. But I really did like the NOLA Mardi Gras uniforms. I thought those were outstanding.
Those were very sharp.
Those were very, very sharp. That was the best sleeved uniform I've seen all year.
And at the end of that trade, Vlade Divac obviously came out and didn't really call his owner out necessarily. But he wanted to point out that he had a better trade offer. Because everyone thought that they got fleeced. They got 40 cents on the dollar for DeMarcus Cousins. And whether you think he is this head case that just is going to bring your team down the toilet, it seemed like he went out of his way to, make it. It's not my fault. Like, I had a better offer.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to pull the trigger on a better offer.
Like we said, that this will either... You're a candidate for GM of the year, or you could get fired because you ruined your team. But similarly, let's talk about Tony Romo. Now, Tony Romo is going to be out there, and here's a guy that... How many snaps did he take last year?
He's barely taken any snaps in the last 3 years.
Really? So, you got a guy that's... You could say he's brittle, and on the other hand, you could say that, hey, he hasn't, he might not be that as old as he is because he hasn't played for 3 years, really. So
and if you're a team like the Texans...
Yeah, if you think you're close...
Because they gave the Patriots everything they had.
Yep.
You're bringing back J.J. Watt to that team that already gave the Patriots a letter up on defense. You've got DeAndre Hopkins. Yeah. You got Lamar Miller. You've got the tight end.
You've got to have somebody get the ball, and you got to just say, hey, we blew it with the other guy. Osweiler. We blew that, which I thought at the time, I didn't see anything that justified that kind of contract. That was a big contract for somebody that had 1 year of experience. And
again, this isn't exactly a new story. We've had Scott Mitchell going back. There's always those guys that come in, they perform incredibly well for a week or two, which is obviously when you think about Jimmy Garoppolo, who's obviously in the trade market, who basically played 1.5 good games, 6 great quarters. Now, keep in mind that was with the Patriot offense and Bill Belichick as the quarterback, who also won the next game.
Coordinator.
Yeah, who won the next week with Jacoby Brissett, a rookie who can't throw the football.
Yep.
And who also created Matt Castle.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the other guy's name. You have to forgive me. I should have done more research. But there was another quarterback who played for the Patriots, same situation.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like if I'm the Patriots, and we talked about Tom Brady last week and the amazing diet he has and his dedication, the fact of the matter is he is a 40-year-old man. And I have Jimmy Garoppolo. If I believe he's that good, and I have him locked up, and at worst, if he walks away at the end of next year, I walk away with the first pick and the third round compensatory picks. And that's just not assuming I don't franchise him and trade him next year.
Sure.
But if I have a team that can compete for a title, and I'm hoping that 40-year-old Tom Brady is the most, he is the first man that can go up against Father Time and defeat him. But I don't know what my incentive is to trade him unless somebody gives me a Godfather offer. And then we're back to the whole thing of, like, if you're the Browns, what kind of pick are you going to give up for a guy that played 6 great quarters of football? If you're the Bears, do you give up the 10th, 15th pick in the draft to get a guy that played 6 great quarters of football and then got hurt?
Yeah.
Like, what is the value of a guy that,
No, I think it's a real interesting thing. You see anybody else in the market for Romo besides the Texans?
I mean, people keep throwing the word Denver in the market. John Elway going to try to make the magic happen again like he did with Manning. Like, you've got the unproven kid, Paxton Lynch, that he drafted in the first round, who's very raw. You have Trevor Siemian coming off surgery, the Northwestern kid, who looked competent. But not.
No.
You're not going to beat the Patriots with Trevor Siemian.
No.
And again, I mean, Tony Romo has not looked good for 3 years. When he's played, he's looked very well.
And if you're Dallas, you're not. It's not you're going to get a big deal. Dallas isn't going to get a big pick for this, but you've got to be able to eat a big salary to take him.
Right. Well, it looks like Dallas. I mean, they need that money elsewhere. That's $17 million sitting on their cap.
Yeah.
If they cut him, I think they walk away from that just fine, and then Tony Romo can go get his own deal somewhere. But again, if I'm the Texans, if I'm Denver, if I have a defense and I have offensive weapons in place, and I'm looking at Brock Osweiler, Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, Tom Savage, I'm probably going to roll the dice with Tony Romo.
Yeah,
and hope that maybe somehow, like Tony Romo was hoping, that even at age 37, those last 3 injuries were all just bad luck, bad timing. I mean, the last one was not on a big hit. And it is the shoulder and the clavicle and all these things. You're going to get hit in the NFL.
A couple times, yeah.
And he looks better. But again, if those are my chances, it's those 4 guys or Tony Romo, I'll roll the dice with Tony Romo.
Sure, man. I think Tony Romo's got a chip on his shoulder, too. And I think he'd love to ride in on a white horse and ride out with a Super Bowl ring.
I'm sure he would. And I know he's a competitive guy, and I know he'd be able to do it. But again, like I said, those injuries are just sitting there.
That would be a really good feel-good story if Tony Romo went somewhere and won a championship this year. But let's. I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to spring this on you, but I'll go first. I think I want to end the segment every week with our hope for feel-good story of the year.
Hope for feel-good story of the year.
So
you dropped the Tony Romo one?
No, I'm going to let that one out there because we both shared that one. So my hope for feel-good story of the year is that Andrew McCutchen comes back, has a phenomenal year for the Pirates, dispels all the rumors about that he can't play anymore. That was just, that his skills were eroding and everything else. Makes the All-Star team, maybe helps the Pirates get a wild card, and then just writes his legacy in the city of Pittsburgh. That would be my feel-good story of the year.
That's a fantastic feel-good story of the year. And obviously, as Pittsburgh people, it's a little bit biased, but
yes,
without a doubt. I remember when they made their initial run in the tournament, I went out and bought a Gonzaga hat. I got caught up in Gonzaga fever. And then every year since then, they've had a nice regular season. They've gotten to the tournament. Mm-hmm. And again, you can argue whether or not they underachieved or overachieved, but they typically have gone out either in the first or second round. I think they made the Sweet 16 once, but I would love to see them make the Final Four. And I don't know if that's even possible. Because we've seen other mid-majors do it, and it's a wonderful story every time it happens. But I've had that soft spot for Gonzaga, and I feel like, again, they've taken a little bit of heat more so than some of those other schools that have faltered.
And a lot of it could come down to where they end up playing.
Right.
I mean, UCLA just beat Arizona, but I think they're third in the Pac-12.
Well, I know the one year they played Kentucky when Kentucky was an 8 seed.
Yeah.
And Kentucky was loaded. They were dealing with injuries and a bunch of freshman players. And they ended up running into like a buzzsaw of NBA talent.
Sure.
And again, like you said, you never know who's... I mean, there's that team that, you look at Syracuse, who pulled off a huge upset the other night. Like a Jim Boeheim team, he's talking about retiring, they slip in the tournament, they go on a little run, maybe they knock off Gonzaga. Again, you just never know. But again, I've got a personal connection to Gonzaga, even though I never went there or know anybody that went to Gonzaga. But that was the first mid-major that I remember sort of buying into the Cinderella story and getting excited about.
Well, you and I have both gone to Catholic high schools. And when I went and saw Gonzaga's gym, it reminded me of a Catholic high school. Not a college, but a Catholic, playing in a big gym in a Catholic high school. And so I've always had a warm spot for Gonzaga as well.
And like I said, I feel like the media's been a little bit harsher on them. Like they sort of always like they're the example of like, well, this is why you don't give a mid-major a high seed because Gonzaga gets there and they fail. And I feel like they've been sort of the committees sort of they can poke at them and they can be like, well, see, we gave Gonzaga the 1 seed and they lost to Kentucky in the second round.
Yeah.
So they proved that we don't have to give mid-majors high seeds. And I'd like to see them just shake off this 20-point or the loss that they were to BYU last night and make a nice run in the tournament, all the way to the Final Four. After that, it's all gravy.
Great.
And it looks like we're coming up on the end of our half hour.
So what I'd like to offer people is the opportunity to tweet to me at Sutton Impact and give us some topics you'd like Jason and I to talk about on the show next week.
And we will be launching our Patreon this week, so you can listen to the iTunes or the podcast there, and you can support us. And we really appreciate it.
Thanks, and all the best. We'll talk to you next week.